Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue the wonderful new book, Strange Monsters and Great Searches by George Laycock. I had actually started the beginning of the book with chapter 1, the last go around. That one we talked about the world famous Nessie, i.e. the Loch Ness Monster. This one will delve into chapter 2, which is titled Unbelievable Fish, and it actually has to do with something, a long lost creature slash fish that I talked about in a past video. It's known as the coelacanth. I hope I'm saying that correctly, coelacanth. It was considered a long extinct fish, and then sometime in the past century, there it was. It was suddenly found. It gives the idea, the credence, the notion that yes, something that is considered long extinct could still pop up somewhere. Could that also be with other cryptids, including dinosaurs too? So great stuff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start this chapter. Again, it's titled Unbelievable Fish. And then here's what it says. By the way, if you haven't seen that video in the past, just type in the coelacanth on my search function, and then it'll pop up there. It did get a good number of views. Every now and then, it seems like people find it. Like all of a sudden there's a surge in views, and so when that happens, I guess they read an article or somewhere, and then that's where it starts getting those views. But check it out again if you haven't had a chance. So here's what this chapter states. One December day in 1938, the captain and crew of a fishing trawler were hard at work off the southern coast of Africa. Day after day, this business was the same. Set out the nets, pull in the nets, sort out the fish, haul them back to town on the mainland, sell them, then get ready to go out again. During his years of commercial fishing, the captain had been brought up into the African sunlight every single species of fish he could think of. There had been little fish, big fish, dull-colored creatures, and others to rival the rainbow. The captain believed, in fact, that he had seen about everything there was to see from down there in the deepening shadows. But on this December day, there was a strange fish out of the past crawling sluggishly on the bottom, some 250 feet beneath the surface. It watched the sleek forms of other fish that swam by, and its large muscular jaws snapped open and shut on any of them that chanced too close. If the antique creature, half crawling and half swimming about on the ocean floor, had been a little faster, he might have evaded the net. This net, stretching out throughout the water, moved closer and closer until there was no longer any way to escape it. And the next thing the creature realized, it was now being rolled and tumbled along by a force too strong to fight. Smaller fish were now all around him, but he had forgotten about his hunger. When the net full of fish was dumped out, the crew looked over this catch. Hundreds of fish were wiggling and squirming there in one pile. Then a crewman spotted the strange large fish that they had scooped off at the ocean floor. The captain saw it, scratched his grizzled chin, and shook his head in bewilderment. Nobody in the crew could recall seeing anything to match this one. Steel blue in color, the monster fish had large scales, weighed 125 pounds, and was 5 feet long. The crew members soon found that the fish was still alive. If they put a hand too close to its gaping jaws, it grabbed for them with those snapping sharp teeth. It lived for 4 more hours. By then, the captain had decided that he would take this strange creature to the museum when he reached port. Perhaps the curator, Miss Courtney Latimer, could tell him what manner of creature he had dredged from the bounty of the sea. But by the time the trawler docked the fish was now 3 days dead. The smell was something a person simply had to adjust to. The fish was so far gone that the museum curator could save only its skin and its skull. Miss Courtney Latimer was puzzled, but one who would surely know was Professor J.L.B. Smith. Professor Smith was located at the Albany Museum, 25 miles west in Grahamstown. Miss Courtney Latimer sent off a wire to Professor Smith, and a few days later, Miss Courtney Latimer led him to the refrigerator in which she had stored the puzzling remains. The story of fish, as Professor Smith and others of his profession know, goes back through the geologic ages to the very beginning of vertebrate life. Some of the history had been read in the record of the rocks where science has found clues in the fossils. Ancient and extinct creatures, washed into muddy deltas and buried in swamps, have had their forms preserved. By studying the rocks layer by layer, scientists had unraveled these mysteries. From present back into the past, deeper and deeper the trails led. Not long ago, there were the mastodons and the saber-toothed tigers, giant sloths, and giant beavers. These were early representatives of the mammals. Back beyond the mammals, there were the ages during which birds evolved, and further still the times when reptiles, including giant dinosaurs, ruled the earth. Millions of years before that, however, no vertebrate animals at all yet lived on land. All life was in the sea, and fishes were evolving from lower creatures. One step in this of animals has long drawn the attention of scientists. This is the mystery of how creatures of the seas finally came out onto land to live. Which of the fish fathered the land dwellers? What manner of creature ventured from these ancient seas millions of years ago to wander among the giant ferns and primitive plants? One of the scientists who had studied this giant step in the animal kingdom was Professor Smith. He knew what the fossils had told science, especially he knew about a group of ancient fish that scientists called coelacanths. Hundreds of fossils of coelacanths had already been dug up, stored in museums, studied, and written about in the annals of science. Many scientists were agreed, as they still are, that this was the group that gave rise to the land creatures. From some pioneering branch of the coelacanth family had emerged individuals able to adapt to life on land. Many in those changing ages, ponds dried, or maybe in those changing ages, ponds dried, individuals struggling to locate new waters managed short then longer trips over land. But this is speculation. So, complete were fossils of the coelacanth that scientists in their laboratories managed to unravel much of the story of this fish of long ago. It had even in those days scales that overlapped like shingles, a perfectly good design still found on today's fish. It possessed, most interestingly of all perhaps, strange stumps connecting to its fin to its body. These short stumps reminded scientists of beginning legs, and it was easy to see that the fins of these primitive fish must have been used for crawling around the floor of the seas. When scientists discussed coelacanths, they spoke of them in the past tense. All evidence pointed towards a story that ended millions of years ago. Saber-toothed tigers were gone, mammoths were gone, dinosaurs were gone. Thousands of species had evolved, flourished, then passed on, extinct, and largely forgotten. The coelacanth, according to the records of the rocks, had lived 250 million years before the dinosaurs. They had lived in many parts of the world from South America, Africa, Europe, and Greenland, but they had started on their downward trail at least 100 million years ago. The youngest fossil remains of them were judged to be 70 million years old. No wonder scientists spoke of the coelacanth as history. Any creature that has been gone for 70 million years is extinct indeed. The marvel of it was that scientists, millions of years later, knew almost exactly what the coelacanth looked like when it was still crawling about the seas. Meanwhile, back in the lab, Miss Courtney Latimer opened the refrigerator, removed the remains, and looked questioningly at the learned Professor Smith. Slowly, there spread across his countenance a strange expression. He felt as if he had stepped into a time capsule and been whisked back through the history of the Earth 10 million years, 20 million, maybe even 70 million years ago. Before him was the remains of a true coelacanth, only days before it had been alive, crawling on about the bottom of the sea. Understandably, when word of this identification flashed out from South Africa to scientists around the world, many were stunned. Some, frankly, did not believe it. The coelacanth was extinct. It had been extinct all those millions of years, and that was that. But the story was soon confirmed. This set in motion one of the most heartbreaking searches in all the world of natural history. In the following weeks, Professor Smith wanted, more than anything else in the world, to have another coelacanth. He wanted one that was whole, so specialists could study its organs and structure part by part, what facts such a specimen might reveal. First, Professor Smith asked himself where in the world men might stand the best opportunity of finding more of these strange creatures. A scientist's experience in the study of fish can, by looking at the outside of the fish, tell something of the kind of world that it inhabits. The coelacanth was no exception. Those strong scales will be protection against rough, rocky ledges. The creature was obviously a slow mover, not a speeding, streamlined fish. Therefore, the coelacanth probably did not capture its prey by not maneuvering the fish it ate. Instead, Professor Smith surmised, it must lurk like a demon in the shadows of rocky crevices, waiting for prey to swim by. On the other hand, there was every reason to believe that the coelacanth would take a fisherman's baited hook. Why then, in a part of the world where fishermen worked the waters every day in their perpetual search for food, had people not caught these creatures? The coelacanth must live in deep waters. Deep waters, rough rocky ledges, places where strong currents sweep food fish past those menacing jaws. That was not the kind of place where a trawl net could work, and it was not the kind of habitat found where the trawler had taken the strange fish. This set Professor Smith to thinking about the whole east coast of Africa, where, along the stretch of land, were the reefs and deep waters that might harbor more coelacanths. He had the advantage of knowing this section of the world thoroughly from his own studies, northward towards the equator, along the shore of Madagascar, around such island groups as the Comores. Those were the places to concentrate in the search. Next, the professor wrote a circular showcasing the drawing of a coelacanth and offering of a reward of £100, about $180, to anyone who could bring him one. Look carefully at the fish, the circular told thousands of fishermen along the coast and throughout the islands. It may bring you good fortune. If you have the good fortune to catch or find one, do not cut or clean it in any way, but get it whole at once to a cold storage. Hopefully, thousands of these circulars were distributed along the coast. The months dragged into years. Professor Smith never gave up. Somewhere there had to be more coelacanths. His search continued. 14 years passed. Ahmed Hussein had been fishing, as he had often did, with the hook and line about 200 yards off the shore. He struggled to bring a tremendous fish onto the boat. Next day, he took it to town to marketplace and offered it for sale, hoping someone wanted a fish so large and fat. But one of his friends in the market showed him a wrinkled scrap of paper, a copy of Professor Smith's circular. Together they studied the picture, and Hussein became more and more excited. Some days later, in a special airplane provided by the government, Professor Smith had arrived. There, on the deck of a friend's ship, was a box with the contents packed in soft materials. The professor was too nervous to unwrap the fish, and the crew laid back the covering. By then, the professor was on his knees beside the box. He took one quick look at the magnificent antique fish. The long search was now ended. I'm not ashamed, the professor later wrote, to say that I wept. It was a coelacanth. During the next few years, others were found, and scientists in their laboratories studied these links with a lost age. What they learned only strengthened their earlier conclusions. This was not, as some had said, the exact creature that had adapted to walk on land and led to reptiles, birds, and other land vertebrates, including man, but it was of the same family. There have been many kinds of coelacanths. They have been much alike wherever they lived throughout the world. Even these that had survived into the 20th century were scarcely changed from those of ancient fossil forms. A member of this family had bridged the gap between the animals of land and the sea. In the world of science, the coelacanth have been hailed as the greatest biological discovery of the century. Then that's it. That's everything associated with chapter 2, involving unbelievable fish. So let's talk about that here. Interesting stuff, right? It just looks like a normal fish, like it's a fish. You wouldn't think much of it. But at the end of the day, this truly had some monumental impacts. This was a long extinct fish, something that was even before the time of the dinosaurs. Presumably, according to the chapter, it had gone extinct around 70 million years ago. And when that happened, there was long speculation that it was the link between everything living in the sea and then coming into the land. Like it was the first creature to be able to make that monumental jump in evolution. At least that was the speculation at the time. And so, with this creature and all the bones being found of it, all it was speculation. And then, lo and behold, back in 1938, there on the southern coast of Africa, that's when that captain there in December suddenly found this creature, this coelacanth, not knowing what it was, thinking that it was something unique. He in turn showcased it to others there in town, and eventually it went to several scientists, and then they in turn realized that this was it. This was the coelacanth. It was fascinating to read that in 3 days the creature had almost decomposed completely. I didn't realize that fishes essentially went that fast. I would have thought that would have lasted a little bit longer. But either way, though, they wanted to get another sample, and so it took 14 years to do so. But they were able to find this legendary fish. Finally, someone else dug it up, and from the sea. And when they did so, they now had a specimen, a second specimen, and then other specimens were found later. Isn't that neat? Again, the notion that something is considered extinct and then it's not leads so much else to open afterward about other things. Long lost dinosaurs. I've talked about those in the past. The Burunjur is probably one of my favorites. The idea that there's a living T-Rex out there in Australia because it has survived the idea of extinction, or the idea again of Loch Ness, the Nessie, how it was something along the lines of a plesiosaur, if I'm not mistaken, that has survived all those years from extinction and is still there out there in this world too. So could there be easily other ones out there? I believe so. I certainly do. The world is so big, and even though so much of it is conquered by man, there's still so many areas that are not, especially out there in the sea, where both of these creatures came from, the coelacanth and Nessie. There's bound to be others that are out there too. So we shall see. But otherwise, a great story. It reminded me, great chapter. It reminded me again of the video that I had done all those years back of the coelacanth. Check it out again if you haven't had a chance. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.